welcome to Social Contemporaries, a podcast where we discuss social institutions, ideas, beliefs, issues, and everything in between. I'm your host, Arya.
And I'm your other host, Akriti.
This is the continuation of the previous episode, Covidology, where we talk in depth about variants, lockdowns, and vaccine. As we all know, new coronavirus variants are emerging quite often. Recently, a new mutated variant was discovered in Vietnam, and researchers claim that this new Vietnamese variant is more hazardous because it combines the Indian and British variant. This variant is so strong that it can be transmitted through air. It means that the transmission rate is very high. This also suggests that the death rate has taken an uphill in the country. Talking about death rates, Peru recently has reported one of the highest death rates worldwide. Honestly speaking, it's really scary and I'm very scared. Anyways, getting back, imagine it surpassed the death rate of India. The situation is worsening in the country. This basically means that Peru's death rate has tripled than before and made it the world's worst death rate.
Although each COVID variant had their own names set by the WHO, like B1351 variant for the one in South Africa, B117 variant in the UK, and the B16172 variant in India, the variants were more popularly known by the nation wherein the variant was first detected. So that would mean the B117 variant in the UK was known as the UK variant, the B1351 as the South African variant, and so on. While this naming is not technically wrong, it passes on the meaning that the nation as a whole gave rise to the variant. And with each variant becoming more dangerous, it would seem as though the country created a risk for the rest of the world. This would then become stigmatized naming. And for this reason, earlier this month, the Indian government has also criticized the naming of the variant discovered in India, B16172, as the Indian variant. But the reality is that the WHO had never officially labeled it as such. Instead, to reduce any stigma, the World Health Organization, WHO, decided upon changing the names of variants to be Greek letters instead. So now, the variants will be known as Alpha for the British one, Beta for the South African variant, Gamma for the Brazilian one, Delta for the Indian one, and so on. This effectively disconnects the stigma associated with the variant emergent country and the coronavirus variants. From my point of view, this seems to be an extremely wise decision that has been taken by the WHO, considering there is rising stigmatization of identities already. While it would have been easier to know where the variant emerged with the naming being after the countries, changing to this style does help us avoid any conflicts of identity, stigma, and stereotypes.
But before we completely give up on the old way of naming the variants, let's discuss the one variant which was supposedly known as the so-called Nepali variant. According to BBC, there is a Nepali coronavirus variant that is extremely dangerous. This new statement, in my opinion, is misleading assertion issued by BBC because the variant in Nepal came from India. Let me give you an example. In Nepal, all cases and mortality rates had fallen and the cases were under control, but when the new strain was discovered in India and the cases began to climb in India, the cases in Nepal began to increase as well within a week. Why was the Indian variant or Delta variant of COVID dubbed Nepali variant by BBC? I really don't get it. What are your thoughts on this, Akriti?
Maybe they just assumed that there was a Nepali variant because, well, cases were rising immensely and at such a fast rate, especially the transmission rate was much higher than the previous variants that had been discovered. And so maybe they just assumed that since the transmission rate is so high, this has got to be a new variant. And well, I think some of it may have also been influenced by. There was one post about how there was coronavirus in Mount Everest and tourism was being impacted. So that was that thing, which is ridiculous because they're not covering what is actually going on in Nepal, but rather focusing on why tourists and Mount Everest trekkers are being harmed. It's like Nepal is only a country for tourism and they don't care about what's going on with its citizens, which, I mean, might not be true. I mean, yeah, but it seemed that way. And I guess they just thought that there was no way the Indian variant could travel into Nepal, but yeah, and also there was this one case where it was said that the Nepali variant at one time was supposed to be like a slight modification of the Indian variant, so maybe they just got confused with that. Maybe, yeah, I guess that.
That's a great point, Akriti. Anyways, moving forward. Since this new so-called Nepali variant has emerged in Nepal, there has been several lockdowns since then in the country. Nepal has been in lockdown for more than 45 days. The cases has been down due to low PCR testing, I guess, but the death rate is still at its peak as a result. Going outside the house has been restricted. Our neighboring country, India, is still in lockdown. Even though slowly the cases are decreasing in India, Mumbai is in level 3 lockdown due to heavy rainfall, high population density, geographical characteristics, and the number of people coming through local trains. This needs to be unraveled, but this was a statement released by Indian government. On the bright side, most of the countries are in ease due to the drop in corona cases. Some countries in North America, Europe, and Asia have loosened up the restrictions for COVID, but there are many countries that are still on lockdown. I will be listing down the most current lockdowns around the world. The most current lockdown is taking place or has taken place in Australia. The government in Australia has imposed a lockdown for a week. It could go on for further to control the situation. Continuing, the Victoria state in Australia has extended the lockdown, whereas the city of Melbourne has eased the restriction as the cases are slowly decreasing. In my opinion, lockdown appears to be a reliable source for reducing coronavirus. Speaking about Canada, indoor dining, such as restaurants, has been cancelled since the beginning of COVID. It is the longest restrictions among all the countries. This can be considered as some sort of lockdown, and I believe this restriction is still happening in Canada. Continuing further on the lockdown, Kenya has also been in lockdown for more than a month due to the spike in cases and death rates. From my findings, South Africa would be hit by a third wave of virus that has led the country to go into more stricter lockdown than before. This may indicate a sharp rise in number of cases and deaths in South Africa. At this point, I just hope for the world to heal and get back to normal. I have not listed all the countries that are recently meaning from the month of April to June, that are in lockdown, but these are a handful that are or were currently in lockdown to the best of my knowledge. Furthermore, coronavirus has hugely affected Brazil. More than 400,000 people have died in Brazil because of coronavirus. President has decided not to impose a lockdown because he thinks that it will greatly affect the economy of the country. But what about the safety of people and increase in cases due to this? What do you think about this, Akriti?
I honestly think this is a very complicated matter. Let's just consider a scenario where there's a lockdown in Brazil. That would mean that, yeah, they're safe and whatnot, right? But what about those who rely on one day earnings? Their incomes would just go nil. And yeah, well, they might not have corona, or they might because they have to work somehow and get money, or maybe they'll die of other causes such as hunger. And in the same scenario, let's say the economy of Brazil goes so down, so low, that would mean that it would negatively impact the manner in which they could handle with COVID and COVID patients too. And on the other hand, if they don't do a lockdown, then the economy can trample too, because, well, so many people will be infected with corona. There's such a high risk of that. And, well, if they do a lockdown, then people might suffer financially, and if they don't, then they might suffer in terms of human resources, finances, and everything in between.
I think I should agree with that as well. It is a very complicated matter.
Yeah, exactly. The most logical solution I can find as of right now is to attain herd immunity as fast as possible. So maybe the Brazilian government could try doing that with the use of COVAX. And just to clear it up, COVAX is one of the main ways in which COVID vaccines are being distributed. The idea behind this system is that developed and economically well off countries would provide subsidies and essentially help less developed countries get quick access to the COVID vaccines. And so, if the Brazilian government was to use the service, which I think it already is, at a much faster pace, then I think maybe, well, the situation could certainly be better. But it's not like Kovacs does not have its faults. Not technically Kovacs, but though Kovacs has been successful in delivering millions of doses of the COVID-19 vaccine, some countries are having to destroy thousands of doses because those doses would have expired by the time they were delivered. So, one of the main issues in attaining herd immunity or even getting the vaccine is that of delivery, as most vaccines have short shelf lives, and it is compulsory to be stored at a certain temperature to be most effective, or even slightly effective. Because it could not be achieved, Malawi destroyed almost 20,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine, while South Sudan also announced that it would have to destroy about 59,000 doses. Both of those countries had received the vaccines from the African Union, but had not been able to, vaccinate people or just administer them because the expiry date was so near. It was 13th April, and it was not logistically possible for them to vaccinate people by then. And so you see, countries in Africa were mostly affected by these kind of issues. Additionally, the lack of human resources, vaccine hesitancy amongst all the people, and slow procedural confirmations of, administering the COVID vaccines within the nations had also contributed to the compulsory destruction of the vaccines. Hence, with all those issues, the distribution and the achievement of herd immunity have been hindered. COVAX was initially created with the intention of distributing 6 vaccines. I'll just name them. So the 6 vaccines that were supposed to be distributed through COVAX was AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Janssen, Moderna, Sinopharm, and Sinovac. But only Pfizer and AstraZeneca have been delivered. And the AstraZeneca was the most delivered one, the highest doses that was delivered. Okay, AstraZeneca was developed in India. And with the massive damages caused by the second wave of coronavirus, which is the Delta variant, vaccine development in India slowed down immensely. And following the variant, it was then decided that vaccine production would be focused on helping more Indian nationals than distribution at the time, which completely makes sense. And as for the other vaccines, I am aware that Moderna was to release its vaccines at the lowest price it could possibly be possible to do, but that wouldn't be until 2022. So this is a huge setback. Nevertheless, many countries are still trying their best to help countries all over the world. Just to give you some examples, the US has altered its initial plan of offering 60 million doses and is now offering 500 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine to COVAX. Similarly, Japan has pledged $1 billion. The EU has pledged 500 million euros, and they're also offering loans of up to 500 million euros. And other European countries have collectively pledged more than 1 billion euros. Additionally, the UK has also, well, let's say, committed to providing 100 million doses in the upcoming months. So that would mean, and they've specified that they would like to distribute about 25 million doses before the end of 2021. And along with that, Germany, France, Italy, and Sweden have also promised at least 100 million doses. These are just some of the countries offering help, but in reality, there are many more countries and nations helping their neighbors deal with the pandemic. Whilst all of these are slightly hopeful, we need to remember that we all are suffering immensely. While vaccines were developed, some of them was also forcefully shut down because of development issues, or distribution is always a problem. And recently, Johnson and Johnson had to throw away 60 million vaccine doses because there was a possible contamination at the development site. But along with all of these, being a student, I want to remind everybody that students are one of those population groups who have been most affected by this pandemic. International students were also severely affected as numerous countries closed off their borders, went into states of emergency and quarantines. And I just want to talk about one such country, which is Australia. There have been various news claiming that Australia had closed off its borders till the end of 2021 or 2022 or 2025. While the fact that Australia closed its borders is true, it was unknown as to exactly when Australia would be reopening its borders and giving international students the permit to return to Australia to continue their studies. All that was planned was that studies would continue online and they would return to campus as restrictions eased, whenever that may be. Following the closure of borders, several international student groups and forums went hectic. There were a number of protests against this decision. While it is clear that the Australian government was concerned for public safety, the nation was losing millions in income from international students. However, after much protest and opposition, under the New South Wales government's pilot program, it was decided that 250 international students would be allowed to enter Australia over the second half of the year. And that would be 250 international students for a fortnight. So every 15 days, 250 international students will be allowed to enter Australia. Upon entering Australia, they will have to stay at accommodation facilities made especially for those students and follow the quarantine protocols and safety protocols and all the safety measures that need to be taken. But this is not the only positive thing. Sydney's ISEX also stepped up to support international students in Australia, recognizing that they're having a hard time. And so this is progress. And hopefully it should be a tad bit easier for international students currently enrolled in Australian universities and colleges, and hopefully this will be the same case, if not better, for this year's applicants too.
I hope so, because I'm also considering in applying for Australian universities, but well, we will further go on to similar topics related to this. This much for today's episode. Stay tuned for more. Bye.
For now.